Alrighty, got the camp set up, got my outline, my emotional support pincurchin. Alright, I think I'm ready. So, hi there YouTube, and welcome back to another discussion video. This one is going to be much more in-depth and much more today. So this is going to be the next in our series of discussion videos leading up to Scarlet and Violet. And today I want to take more of a step back and look at Sword and Shield itself. Now, Sword and Shield were very divisive games. I personally loved them, but there's also something else about Sword and Shield, and that is that I hate them. My feelings about Sword and Shield are very complex in terms of its metagames, in terms of its design, in terms of its writing, which is what we're going to talk about today. So today I'm going to talk about the story of Sword and Shield. We're going to talk about what it was, what it could have been, and what we can learn from it, both looking forward and looking back. So yeah, so that's what today's going to be about. I'm going to start off talking about some specific character relationships and how they interact. I'm then going to talk about the overall themes of Sword and Shield. And then at the end is going to be the part where I actually review / critique the game, giving more of my opinions and suggestions for it, as opposed to just talking about the story itself. So without further ado, let us begin. So the story of Sword and Shield comes down mostly to three characters. There are three characters that, if you want to understand the story of Sword and Shield, are the most important. Those characters are Hop, Leon, and Rose. These characters in particular, there's a lot of overlap between them, there's a lot of contrast, and there's a lot to talk about. So let's talk about Hop first. So Hop is your rival in this game, and Hop is your primary rival in this game. Sword and Shield borrows / iterates on the rival structure that was started in X and Y, where you have one main rival, and then multiple sub-rivals that branch off, but only one of them is your definite main rival. And this game actually does that pretty well, in my opinion. I actually really like Hop. I know some people can find him annoying, but I think he's adorable. He's a sweetheart. He's so stupid, and I love him. The main driving force for Hop throughout the game is his admiration for Leon. Hop is a character who has grown up admiring his older brother, Champion Leon. He wants to be like him. He wants to be champion himself. And his entire driving force of the game, for the main plot of it, is to be like Leon and to achieve that goal. And the game actually does a lot of interesting ways to illustrate that. And also illustrate not just who he is and why he's like that, but also the flaws inherent with that. Hop is probably one of the best examples in Pokemon as an entire franchise of using their mechanical choices in terms of things like Pokemon choice, team composition, stuff like that, in order to inform their narrative. So Hop, right from the beginning, is missing something as a character. He is flawed in a way that will not be fully explored until the end of the game, which is, neat to me. In your very first battle with Hop, he starts out with a level 4 Wooloo, which you KO, which allows your Pokemon to level up, gain a stab move, which lets you easily defeat his Pokemon, even though which allows you to easily defeat his Pokemon. So what would have been a fair fight is actually made worse by the fact that he has Wooloo. And this is a cleverly designed fight for a lot of reasons. It teaches players about experience and leveling up. Teaches them about the difference between neutral attacks like tackle and super effective attacks like, your whatever coverage move your starter has. But it also informs you a lot about Hop and also about what the Dame has to say. So there's a lot of jokes about this moment because it's like, wow, this guy really sucks. I thought Pokemon was supposed to be about using your favorites and all that. But what this does is it highlights something. It highlights that Hop is a character who is very driven. He wants to be just like his older brother. He wants to be champion. He wants to go do the whole 9 shebang dang yards. But he's missing something. He's a character who has not yet put in the work. Even though technically he's been a trainer for longer than you because he's had this Wooloo, he hasn't actually put much work towards that yet, besides emulating his brother, trying to be able to do the same cool pose. Hop himself hasn't actually put in the work yet to achieve anything. And because of that, instead of being a strength, his past and his Wooloo ends up being a detriment in his very first battle. And so right off the bat with Hop, we are setting up his weaknesses, both narratively, because, obviously the fact that he wants to be just like his brother and is so short-sighted in that is a weakness, but it's also setting up that mechanically with your very first battle with him. And throughout the rest of the main plot, Wooloo is consistently used as a plot device as a narrative tool in Hop's team, highlighting the issues therein. Hey, baby, you want to be on the discussion video? So, when Hop is... So, whenever you battle Hop, there are a couple big moments that happen in his story. The biggest in terms of starting a change in him... Oh, baby, are you okay? So, one of the biggest in terms of starting that change for him is whenever he loses to Bede. This is just a terrible moment for him. Absolutely crushes him. And we're going to get into why a little bit later, but after this, when Hop is at his lowest, he removes Wooloo from his team. In what is a brilliant way to show the emotional turmoil he's going through, but also, as he recovers from this and becomes stronger afterwards by putting Wooloo back on his team, it is symbolizing the growth that he's going through. It is symbolizing him sort of coming to grips with who he is and how to progress towards his goal in a really cool way. And that's kind of where we're going to pause on Hop for a moment. And now let's talk about Leon. Leon is, in my opinion, the full champion package. Leon is the perfect example of a character who they want to have their cake with, and then also eat that cake. Eat that sexy Leon-shaped cake off of his rippling biceps. I'm kidding, kind of. But yeah, so Leon is one of those characters where they haven't really tried to do it since Cynthia, in my opinion. Although I guess they tried with what's her name in Gen 6. But anyway, so in Leon, we have a character that is charismatic. A character that is, actually the strongest around. There's no two bits about it. Until you show up, Leon is the strongest around. He is also plot relevant. And he is consistently involved throughout the story. But that does not remove him from his air of superiority or his, supposed greatness. And he's also funny and entertaining in his own right. With a character like Leon, they really are trying to do it all with him. And in my opinion, they're actually fairly successful in doing so. And the reason I go into this is because Leon is sort of like this archetypal champion and is in a lot of ways the Galar region itself. Leon is a character that loves the Galar region and its people, and its battles, and to Leon, because he is the best at battling in the Dalar region, he is also the Dalar region itself, kind of. Leon is this character that is defined by his independence and his hubris, as you see in like the kind of final moments of the game, and he's incredibly well characterized. The fact that when he loses his champion match, he like rips off his hat and chucks it, like you can see him shaking with frustration, and it's really hard to tell whether he is, you know, incredibly pissed off at you because you beat him, or if he is like, you know, like legitimately excited and just a little frustrated. It's like, it's very vague. It's one of the rare instances of a player character, well, not player character, of a human character having like an acting choice in a Pokemon game, which is actually kind of sad that it's such a rarity, but, you know, regardless, you know, Leon is this very well characterized character. What kind of nonsense am I spouting? But he is a character that is very, you know, he's the full champion package. And they do a lot of interesting things with him. The first thing that they really do is that Leon is a character that kind of does all the plot himself. And that is because his main motivation is the cultivation of strength. You could compare him to a character like, say, Isaac Netero from Hunter x Hunter. He is a character who is, you know, above it all, the strongest in the world, and the main focus of him is in cultivating those who are coming after him, in the hopes that there will be someone to challenge him. Not beat him, of course. Good lord, no one could do that. But to challenge him. And that is Leon's sort of driving goal between the whole story. That's why he gives the letters of recommendation to you and Hop. Because he wants people to get almost as strong as him. He wants to be challenged. That's why, throughout the game, he's separating you from whatever plot that happens. Because, you know, on the one hand, obviously, you know, you are literal children. You should not be in charge of saving the world. But it's also because he wants you to focus on your gym challenge, get as strong as possible, as efficiently as possible, so that way he can have a better battle with you at the end. Leon is a very selfish character, and it is characterized incredibly well. There's also the sort of relationship between him and Hop, where Leon creates this massive pedestal for Hop to live up to, and it's not all entirely Leon's fault that Hop looks up to him so, and that Hop is not only so enamored with him, but also left vulnerable by that admiration. There's a reason that Bede hurts Hop so badly after Hop loses to him. Up to this point, Hop was told by Leon that rivalries will make you stronger. That's why Hop's never really bothered by any of the losses he has to you, because, you know, in that early game, you know, all these losses are just, you know, part and parcel of getting stronger, you know? None of the losses hurt him. They were all part of the process. But we're all playing by the same rules. Whenever he loses to Bede, he's suddenly up against someone who isn't playing by the same rules as us, who doesn't believe in getting stronger for strength's sake. Bede is a prick, and Hop is very susceptible to pricks because up to this point, the entire process has only been sold to Hop as getting stronger through friendly rivalries. So Leon has kind of set him up for this failure, not necessarily intentionally, but like the reason that Hop is so hurt by this is because he's just not prepared for it. Like the moment that he loses to Bede and just gets torn into, it kills him. That's why he goes to such drastic measures, like taking his favorite Pokemon off of his team, because Bede was mean to him. And so in this way, the cultivation of strength that Leon is a part of is mostly portrayed positively. You know, it's never like a bad thing that Leon is trying to make the trainers better in the Galar region. It's never really portrayed negatively. But cultivating the strength of the people who are coming after you, regardless of the consequences, is, you know, in and of itself kind of a morally questionable thing. That's worth thinking about. Now, let's move on to Rose a little bit. Chairman Rose is arguably the most important character in Pokemon Sword and Shield, because in a lot of ways the game is about him, because in a lot of ways Chairman Rose is the Galar region. And first, let's kind of highlight something about these three characters I've chosen to talk about today. Hop is a character who loves the Galar region and its people and its culture. He, obviously is a very fun, love-filled little boy. But the reason that he feels love for everything around him is all sourced from that initial admiration for Leon. Everything in Hop's life is filtered through the lens of how much he admires Leon and wants to be like him. He gets better about this over the course of the game, but that's kind of the lens that he starts out from, right? Is he admires the Galar region, he admires Leon. Leon, by contrast, is a character who loves the Galar region. He loves its people and its Pokemon and its culture, specifically its battling culture. Because, as stated before, Leon is the Galar region. He is the best at battling in it. He is the Galar region's battles, in his mind. And so, these two characters both feel love for the region they're in, want to protect it, want to help it. But it's all filtered through Leon. Leon in a very selfish way. Not that what he does is bad, but Leon is a very selfish character. And Hop is all filtered through Leon as well, through that admiration. That also gives him somewhere to grow from as a main character rival sort. Chairman Rose is someone who loves the Galar region, he loves its people, and he loves its culture. But he loves it for its own sake. He loves the Galar region's existence in a way that's a lot different from Hop and Leon, and in a way that's arguably a lot more selfless. Chairman Rose is someone who, believes in that same sort of idea of cultivation of strength that Leon does, except his is a lot more ambiguous. Depending on how much credit you give Pokemon, you could argue it's ambiguous on purpose. I'm not going to make that argument, but I am going to say that they believe in the same cultivation of strength. Leon's is very positive, while Chairman Rose's is a lot more ambiguous. Not necessarily negative, but ambiguous. The main two examples of the cultivation of strength that you have for Chairman Rose are going to be Embiid and Oleana. Oleana is a pretty positive example overall. She obviously goes very overboard in terms of, how she reacts to things in the same way Bede does. But, Oleana is this strong, independent person who is fully dedicated to her cause. And a lot of that is because of Chairman Rose. This is other supplemental material makes that very explicit, but that's all information that kind of exists implicitly in the text of Sword and Shield itself. Oh, as a side note, there's a lot that we can add to this conversation using supplemental texts like the anime and Twilight Wings and different mangas. I'm sure have a ton in them. I'm not going to specifically be referencing any of those, even if they have colored my argument somewhat in hindsight. I'm not really going to be using any of those in this conversation. They're worth noting and thinking about. In the anime, for instance, Chairman Rose has a dad who died in the coal mines. we're not gonna like be dwelling too much on those though, so try to put those out of your mind for now. They're just side notes really for this discussion on Sword and Shield's narrative itself. That was just a quick side note. But yeah, so Oleana, pretty positive example of the cultivation of strength from Rose. But then Bede is a lot different. Bede is someone who was recommended by Chairman Rose, who was plucked out of poverty in an orphanage by Chairman Rose, and then just kind of left to his own. And it's really hard to tell how much of Bede's overbearing, like, problematicness in the plot is because of Chairman Rose, and how much is just Bede, going overboard because Chairman Rose left him to his own devices. And it's really hard to tell, and it's a very sort of ambiguous how much of it is Chairman Rose's fault that Bede ended up this way. But it is an example of how Chairman Rose has cultivated strength, but really just done it for its own sake. Like, it's cultivated strength, trying to make the Galar region stronger. That's what the whole gym challenge is all about in the first place, But it's left a bit more ambiguous why or how. How good of a thing it is that Chairman Rose is doing this. Yes. Aw, Bolton is so cute. Bolton, wake up. Sorry, needed a moment to gather my thoughts. We're going over a lot. So, Chairman Rose cultivates strength in the same way that Leon does. And now we're going to start getting into the ways that these three characters sort of contrast with each other overall. So, there is an obvious connection between Hop and Leon. Hop is obviously Leon's younger brother who admires him. And there's an obvious connection between Chairman Rose and Leon, because these are basically the two most important men in the Galar region. These two characters are, they basically run the show between the two of them. Chairman Rose is in charge of everything, and Leon is, the best of the best. But there is a connection between Hop and Chairman Rose, and that is that they are both characters who have really lost sight of things in a way that Leon never has, because Leon can see what's important. Leon can see himself in the mirror every morning, and that's what's important. So in the same way that Hop loses sight of what he's doing with his life when he takes Wooloo off of his team, Chairman Rose is someone who has lost sight of his love for battling itself, because, he's kind of, put his Pokemon on the back burner and focused entirely on his attempts to save the Galar region. And then in the post-game DLC in the Crown Tundra, we actually get some more of that from Peony, when we find out that actually the relationship between Peony and Rose is very similar to the relationship between Leon and Hop, where Rose was a younger brother who admired his older brother, who was a champion. And so we kind of see the contrast between these characters, There's a lot of overlap between them in what they have sight of, what they lose sight of, in terms of how they treat the world. And understanding these three characters is really key to understanding Pokemon Sword and Shield's narrative as a whole. Depending on how you package it, Sword and Shield is a narrative about someone who loves the Galar region with all their heart and wants to protect it, and along the way, loses sight of that and goes on a rampage. It's also a game about somebody who loves the Galar region, someone who wants to be the best they can be, loses sight of themselves along the way, finds themselves back along the way, and then fails in their pursuit of that to a more capable rival. Or you could read Sword and Shield as the game about the greatest champion in the world, who is super great and awesome, definitely not terrible at all, no character flaws, and then he loses at the end of the main character. And I think that the sort of like plurality and contrast between these characters is what makes Sword and Shield so interesting. Because this is kind of like these are the three most important characters with the most to say about. But this section is also going to be a little bit disappointing because I don't really have a thesis for it. Sword and Shield, in fact, kind of lacks a thesis. There is no real grand, like, conclusion to this. There are some incredible moments that we'll get to. But, like, there is no grand conclusion to the way that these characters bounce off of each other. Leon and Chairman Rose are two characters that are completely incapable of understanding each other. While Hop and Chairman Rose are both characters that have trouble seeing what it is that they really desire and how to achieve the goals that they truly believe in their heart of hearts. But there is never actually a moment where Hop and Chairman Rose have a back and forth. There is no moment of catharsis where these two characters that are both so profoundly impacted by Leon ever hash it out. And that's kind of one of like the disappointing things about Sword and Shield, but also one of the beautiful things about it because of these character interactions and the way that they intersect. I think that this sort of intersecting, contrasting nature can be found in a lot of these sections of Sword and Shield's narrative. You have minor things like the interactions between, the relationship between Melanie and Doherty. Two family members whose disagreements are so great that they are literally divided by the physical copies of the games that you buy. Or the way that just the tangled relationships that this game kind of weaves, like the connecting dots of different people and their interactions, their contrasting points and their similarities and all that. But that's where I'm going to take a pause on it for now about the character relationships, specifically between Hop, Leon, and Rose. And before we move on to themes, like, share, and subscribe and all that stuff, I guess. That's a YouTuber thing, right? I think they've started burying the leads for that, like, halfway through the video, which is good. Are we halfway through? I'm not looking at the clock. Anyway, so, time to talk about the themes of Sword and Shield. Now, Sword and Shield, if you were looking for a theme in it, there are a couple of things you can do. The first is Sword and Shield as a nuclear allegory. Now, this sounds like a stretch, but it's actually pretty close to being incredibly blatant. So the plot of Sword and Shield is essentially that, the backstory of it is that fairly recently, Sword and Shield moved to a new energy source that powers pretty much everything in the region, both technologically and the main, mechanical gimmick in the games, which is Dynamax. This is a relatively recent development, and Rose is kind of at the forefront of this energy source and taking care of the region with it. This energy source is, of course, all actually the product of Eternatus, the legendary Pokemon, the sort of third legendary Pokemon of this region. Eternatus is a Pokemon that is basically this incredibly powerful source of power, but is also incredibly dangerous. Its power can turn Pokemon into, from their normal, friendly, cute, cuddly selves into a danger to everyone around them. As we see with the Pokemon that rampage and just randomly Dynamax thanks to Eternatus' power leaking out over the course of the game. And ultimately, it's the failure to control this power puts the entire world at risk, which, can very clearly be locked onto a nuclear allegory. If we take a look at Eternatus itself, if I was smarter, I would have put Eternatus in the camp so we could look at it. But, honestly, that's fine. I can just go straight to Eternatus, which is not sitting right here. Where did I put my Eternatus at? I know I had him. Yeah, here we go. So, Eternatus is, there are a lot of design features of Eternatus that also can point to a nuclear allegory. There is its unnatural glow. The skeletal nature of its design is reminiscent of the sort of, radioactive, like, corpse, the way it's just like the bright light surrounding, like, the skeleton. And the plot, and it's a sort of, basic, what's the word? The plot, and it's like, basic outline points towards the nuclear allegory pretty well. I'm not 100% sure that's like a super intentional thing, because, while you can argue that nuclear is the allegory, you could also argue it as an allegory for fossil fuels, or really any energy source, because it also looks like, an old dead dragon, which, you could definitely argue it looks a lot more like dragon bones than, say, like, nuclear warning sign bones. And the fact that its influence is slowly leaching out and poisoning all around it could be referencing to fossil fuel issues like global warming, or the way that nuclear plants can lead to increased rates of cancer for not just people directly affected by nuclear accidents, but the way that it kind of leaches out into the environment around it. So it's not really a clear-cut allegory, and there's also not really a clear-cut answer that Pokemon really gives if it was a clear-cut allegory. Because at the end of the day, there is no real, choice between them. It's always kind of painted as, like the energy that Eternatus gives is good, and the threat is completely sidelined at the end because you catch Eternatus, but there's still enough leftover energy from when he was the energy source that everything's perfectly fine. And it doesn't really grapple with anything, so you can make the argument that Eternatus itself is nuclear inspired, but I wouldn't argue personally that Sword and Shield overall is a nuclear allegory. You can definitely read some of that into it, though, and that's why I think it's worth noting in terms of themes for the game. There's another theme, though, that's very important to talk about, and that is the importance of transparency, both interpersonally and politically as well. Most of the conflict in this game comes from the fact that the main figureheads, the main adults in charge of the Galar region, are very secretive, keep to themselves, and are going to do everything themselves, by golly, because that's the only person I can trust. Chairman Rose and Leon both share this trait. Chairman Rose is keeping the entire Eternatus factor of this energy source completely secret. The fact that Eternatus fuels it all and is leaching out and potentially, harming the entirety of the region, all that is kept secret, and Chairman Rose is dealing with it all by himself. He has staff and Oleana that help him out, but in terms of making the decisions and taking care of things, in Chairman Rose's eyes, they all fall back to him. And that is pretty much the source of the conflict in the game, is that Eternatus is becoming a problem. Chairman Rose is the only one doing anything about it because he's the only one that's letting anyone know. Even though some of the brightest researchers of the day, Sonia and Magnolia, are in the region researching things, they don't get told anything. You have the best trainer in Galar's entire history, potentially, at the forefront with a close relationship with Rose, but is not involved in the incredibly powerful Pokemon-based project. In some ways, it is completely ridiculous that Chairman Rose would not involve these super important, obviously should be involved people in the fate of the nation. But it's also not that surprising because, as we discussed before, Chairman Rose is, much like Leon, a very independent person. And he's going to do everything himself because, by golly, who else can he trust? And then you see that attitude reflected in some of the people that he has the biggest mentorship roles with in Oleana and Bede. Because Chairman Rose can't do it, then by golly, I'll have to do it for him. Or to help him. It's a very toxic recursion cycle. And of course, Leon is the exact same way. While Leon isn't directly responsible for the incidents of the plot himself, Leon takes on the exact same approach of, by golly, I'm going to do it myself. Anytime that the plot threatens to happen to the main character, who in this reading is a stand-in both for the young people of the world, as well as a stand-in for, society as a whole, like the public, I guess you would say. Anytime the plot threatens to happen to them, we get immediately sidelined. It's like, hey, listen, you're a baby child boy. I got this. You go focus on your gym training, get real strong so I can have a good time with you. I got this. And on the one hand, understandable. We are literally children. We should not be responsible for the fate of the region. But also, considering that we have a vested interest in living, you'd think that there would be more people involved with this than just Leon himself. And while all the individual events throughout the course of the game up until the end he can handle all by himself, the fact that no one else gets involved before, like, the final events is itself kind of a problem, right? And even the game does kind of view it this way. Like, all of the gym leaders who you would think would operate under, like, the similar idea of, we're in charge, so we should be doing things about this. Basically, all the other gym leaders don't do anything else besides. It's just Leon. Because all of them are focused on the cultivation of strength that is the guiding... the cultivation of strength that is sort of the guiding light for the Galar region for Chairman Rose and Leon. So the only people dealing with this are Chairman Rose in his own little bubble without letting anybody else know, and Leon, who is just not really letting anybody else get involved or asking for any sort of help because he's just dealing with it all himself because, he is Leon. He really is that good. At least he believes so. And as things get worse and worse, you begin to see that, you really probably should have been involved. Maybe if not from the very beginning, you definitely should have been involved more at some point. Definitely more of the adults, like the gym leaders and the people in positions of power, should have been involved at some point. Instead, everything bubbles up until the very end, when there's suddenly a huge catastrophe, which we had no way to prevent because we weren't involved. We weren't allowed to be involved. And in that way, Sword and Shield is very much a game about the importance of transparency. And this is, of course, not just for the plot, but also for the characters as well. a character like Hop, who cannot be transparent with himself, who has to learn about that, about what he wants, about what he can do. And that's something that he doesn't really come to grips with until the end of the game, and you can argue he still doesn't because it's something he's still working on. A character like Nessa, who doesn't really know what it is she wants to do. She wants to be a gym leader, but she also wants to be a model, and she has to balance those two things. And then there's also transparency in relationships. Doherty and Melanie, we mentioned before, as it being so funny that that their quarrel literally has them separated by the bounds of time and space. Not literally, but kinda, yeah, which is just so funny to me. But again, the issue is that they can't really communicate. That communication between a mother and son has broken down. The entire reason that the Team Yell subplot happens is because the gym trainers of Spikemuth aren't communicating with Piers or Marnie, and Piers isn't communicating with them. So it just becomes this kind of like little mess that's happening the entire time and annoying everybody. Not a big deal, but it's a little annoying. Definitely could have done something about that. But there is positive examples of what transparency should be as well. Sonia and Magnolia are a great example of this, where Magnolia is a character who is very upfront about her expectations for Sonia. And Sonia, for her part, is a character that is actually upfront with us, the audience, and therefore, in this reading, the public. Sonia is the only character that is involved with the main plot that keeps us in the loop. She is investigating Galar's legends in an attempt to sort of deal with the issues that are cropping up with all the Dynamax stuff and whatnot. But she actually keeps us involved with it. When she finds new information, she talks to us about it. She talks over her ideas and theories with us as we go. She never puts any responsibility on us, after all. We are literal children. Want to stress that. But she keeps us informed. When Sonia is involved, we are not separate players. We are part of the team. And, it really makes you wish that Chairman Rose had been kind of like that, because then the plot wouldn't have happened. But, that's kind of the point, is that, Sword and Shield, you can argue, is a game that is about the importance of transparency, both in interpersonal relationships as well as politically. Now, I definitely wouldn't argue that Sword and Shield is at all, leftist or anything. While the dangers of corporations is definitely something that is on the radar of Sword and Shield to some extent, it does specifically highlight the fact that it used to be coal power before it switched to this new energy source that is entirely better, that they have no qualms about saying is better and framing is better, even with the risks it poses. It doesn't really do much beyond it with that. And it doesn't really have a very strong ideology either way. And I actually feel kind of bad about portraying Sword and Shield as a whole as having this theme of transparency. Because it really doesn't. Sword and Shield as a whole really lacks a defining theme. I mean, I guess you could argue friendship, togetherness, working with Pokemon, which you could argue is the theme for every single Pokemon game. But really, Sword and Shield is a game that lacks any strong, narrative theming to it. Which isn't necessarily a bad theme. You can argue that for some other Pokemon games as well. The only Pokemon games, in my opinion, that have a really strong, solitary theme that they really delve into would be, Generation 3, with its theme of harmony between people and Pokemon, Pokemon being a stand-in for nature. Or Generation 7 with its focus on legacy, rebellion, and what leads people to rebel against their legacies. Sun and Moon, just absolutely wonderful games, so well written. I love them. But Sword and Shield doesn't really have that same sort of central conceit to it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely noticeable because there are other elements of the game that really feel like they would should come to something, right? Like Hop, Leon, and Rose. There's so much interweaving between these characters, so much interesting stuff. But the game doesn't really go anywhere with it. It doesn't really have like a central theme that it comes down on, which you could argue is more realistic. I'm not necessarily going to argue that, but, it is something that does need to be said when you're talking about Sword and Shield, is that it itself doesn't really come down on having a central theme. It just kind of peters out. And I think that'll be as good a time as any to segue to our final section, which is going to be an actual proper review / critique of Sword and Shield. I'm going to share my thoughts on it, what I think is good, and what I think is bad. What I think is good and bad. Greetings. So when it comes to Sword and Shield's narrative, and I want to stress that this review critique is about the narratives of Sword and Shield, not the gameplay or anything else. We're pretty much focusing on the narrative here. There's a lot that I like about it. The first one is the character relations, the webs that the game weaves between all these different characters. I waxed lyrically about it for the first chunk of this video. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more now, because that sort of like interlocking web of relationships and like points of contrast that exist between all these different characters is not just existence in that main sort of trio of characters. They're all over the place. Let's take another snapshot of the web of characters that we weave. So you have Leon and Sonia. These characters are friends now, and they were friends who went on a journey together a long time ago. In the modern sense, Sonia is also good friends with Nessa, who has a similar struggle to her, where Sonia was someone who was once a gym challenge battle-focused trainer who was aiming to be the best. She eventually stepped down from that and instead focused on research instead. Nessa has a similar struggle between battling and modeling, but instead of stepping down from one to focus on the other, she is instead kind of trying to balance the two of them. So you have these three characters. All right, so you got Leon. So you got Leon and Sonia, and then you have Sonia and Nessa. In the modern day, Leon's biggest rival, besides you, the player character, once you beat him, is going to be Raihan, the 8th and final gym leader, who is the most concerted effort at taking down Raihan every year with the gym challenge. And so, so now you have another chain onto it. And then you have Raihan, who is connected to Piers. Piers is a character with a similar struggle to some of the other ones, where he has to struggle between his, desire to be the strongest gym leader he can be, and the fact that in order to be so, in the place that he most cares about, Spikemouth, he has to give up part of what being a gym leader is in Dynamaxing. And so, that's another link on the chain. And then Marnie is obviously Piers' younger sister, who is dealing with, just kind of overcoming the legacy of having her older brother as a successful gym leader. And so you kind of see like where we're going at here. You know, we've got like these different chains, but that chain also links back around because Sonia and Leon are both friends with Hop. You know, obviously Leon's younger brother, who is friends with us, who is connected with Marnie as one of our rivals. And so we've got kind of like this second weave of characters, like kind of like snapshotted off. And at any point, these characters all have just enough depth and intrigue to them where you could conceivably put any two of them in a room and they would have interesting conversations to have. This is actually a really important thing for Sword and Shield to do in the modern Pokemon media ecosystem, where you have to deal with like multiple spin-off mangas. You have at least one full anime adaptation that'll use these characters, or at least some of them, and then multiple smaller ones in the forms of things like Twilight Wings and shorts. You've got spin-off games like Pokemon Master Sex, and of course, tons and tons of fan works and fan fictions and fan discussions. And Pokemon sets this up incredibly brilliantly in Sword and Shield. Arguably, it's the thing that Sword and Shield does the best. And while there are these complicated webs of like character interactions and relationships, it's not like something like Game of Thrones where all this is super complex and overly deep, where like, you know, you really have to dig in to understand it. A lot of these relationships are very upfront and easy to parse, even as they become interconnected with a lot of narrative depth to dig into if you'd like, in terms of comparisons and contrast between the different characters. And Pokemon does this incredibly well in Sword and Shield in a way that I really like, and also doesn't actually cause or be responsible for any of the complaints I have about it. All of this is really good stuff. You can argue that Sword and Shield doesn't do enough in terms of actually interacting with these gym leaders. The lead cards are a really good way to add extra information about them, but it's no substitute for like actual content with them. But, you know, that's kind of like here or there. In terms of what we have, it's, you know, really good, in my opinion. The second thing that Sword and Shield is really good at, in my opinion, is in building those really big moments. Now, Sword and Shield has some really good, really well thought out moments. The final like lead up to the climax, or the entire ending sequence is full of them. The final battle with Yu Hop and Zamazenta and Zacian versus Eternatus is incredible. From like a fun perspective, a storytelling perspective, that whole sequence is great. You get the payoff to Leon's hubris biting him in the butt, because, you know, of course he is going to try and capture this incredibly dangerous creature instead of just like trying his best to defeat it, and that results in him almost, you know, perishing himself and having to sacrifice himself to save you. And it's this really, you know, this really intense moment that caps off the main plot of the game, and it's really good. And of course, there is the lead up to that final moment where, or like the last moment of Rise in action before the climax happens, where you and Hop battle your way to the top of Rose Tower. You're like so worried about Leon. You're like, oh my god, what's going on? And then you get there, and there's just this like very quiet moment between Chairman Rose and Leon, these two characters that have so much in common, but are so different, and cannot reconcile their differences for the sake of the Galar region, and for the sake of all the people that actually matter in it. So there's just like this tragic moment between the two of them, where they're trying to have a dialogue with each other, and they just can't. When you're expecting to have this really big, like, climactic, like, showdown confrontation with, like, Rose, who is obviously the bad guy, But then instead, you just have this quiet moment between two characters that have so much in common, but just can't reconcile their differences. If Sword and Shield was a better game, that's the kind of moment that people would be talking about for years. Sword and Shield's not a better game, though, so it's like one really well written moment that is immediately undermined afterwards. But in terms of crafting some of those big moments, Sword and Shield is good. A couple other ones that I really like is meeting up with peers for the first time and the reveal of what Team Yell was all along. I thought that was really well done. The quiz in the fairy gym, I think, was very well done, very informative about the world and about some of its trainers. I thought that was a very good moment. The whenever Bede goes crazy and tries to destroy the mural, another really good moment. A lot of character depth there. Engaging, interesting. There are a lot of really good moments in Sword and Shield throughout it that I have a lot of respect for. And I think from there, we segment into my less positive critiques. Because Sword and Shield has a lot of flaws to it. I think the first big one is pacing. Because Sword and Shield, and part of this is not just a narrative thing, it's a mechanic one as well. But Sword and Shield has a really bad habit of just not really doing anything. Part of that sort of thing that I talked about, like not really putting a positive or negative spin on it before, was the fact that you're so insulated from the plot most of the time. While I get what they're going for and like it, it also leaves you feeling very, what's the word I'm looking for? It can give you a sort of a sense that all the interesting stuff is happening away from you, and it can kind of make it feel like you're missing out. While the stuff that you actually do on your own isn't always super interesting enough to keep you fully interested on its own merit. There's a big lack of interesting dungeons and places to traverse, and that does impact the narrative as well. Sword and Shield also has like 3 separate climaxes. Because you have the initial Pokemon lead, which caps off your battle against Hop. Then you have the entirety of a villain arc shoehorned into the Macrocosmos stuff when you're trying to find Leon after the, Elite Four stuff. Or not Elite Four, but like the Champion League stuff. And then after all that, and you have the fight against Eternatus, then you have a third climax afterwards when you fight Leon. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a very oddly paced thing where it feels like all the plot happens at you at the very end. Even though there were sprinklings of it throughout the game, having so much of it be backloaded like that really runs the pacing a little bit ragged. And while we're talking about the climax, let's shift to the biggest problem in the game, and that is Chairman Rose. As we discussed, Chairman Rose is arguably the most important character in the game narratively. Makes it pretty disappointing that he sucks as a character. Chairman Rose has a lot of interest and intrigue to him, but how they stick the landing is inconsistent. In the beginning, it is ambiguous whether Chairman Rose is a legitimately well-meaning person that loves the Galar region and wants to protect it, but there's just enough that could be read as him being slimy, conniving, and secretive that if he comes out at the end to actually have been evil all along, no one would bat an eye. And I think that ambiguity is well done for Nidoran. What is wrong with you, buddy? Calm down. Um, so, yeah, so the initial stages of Rose are very well done. It is very, it's very well, it's left very ambiguous on purpose. How much of Rose is this charismatic, kind-hearted person who wants the best for everyone, and how much is, this kind of slimy, secretive, corporation owner. And then you have that tender moment with Leon that cements Chairman Rose as this person who cares deeply for the region, but just can't let anyone else help them and can't get other people involved. Whether that be because they can't manage to or they just aren't willing to, it's left ambiguous. But Chairman Rose is, in that scene with Leon, the best written scene, best acted scene in the game, in my opinion. In that moment, cements him as someone who really does care, but just can't connect with the people around him enough to save everyone. But then, whoops, surprise, surprise, in the very next scene, turns out he's actually evil all along, and he's decided to let Eternatus loose on the region for reasons. He has a big villain monologue thing on the TV, and while you can't argue that he still cares about the Galar region as a whole, the way he just kind of sicks Eternatus on them in a way that feels like it's out of spite for Leon is just not really in keeping with the character we saw the night before. And it's like, there's so many other ways they could have handled it. They could have changed it in so many ways. They could have had the exact same thing happen. But instead of Chairman Rose having a villain monologue, just have him announce that there is a, that there is a catastrophe. Gonna go fanfiction a little bit here, but there are so many other ways that they could have done that portion of the ending. The fact that they just have Chairman Rose go either evil or crazy is just so frustrating to me because he was such an interesting character before they made that choice. Why? And even in the post-game, with the way Oleana talks about him, it still feels like they're trying to portray him as that, and the way he, finds his love for battling again. Then why does he have a fucking villain monologue on the big screen? Why are you making him a so much less interesting character right at the end? It's just incredibly frustrating. Because, in my vision for the end of the game, you get down to where Eternatus is. Rose, instead of coming on the big screen, talking about how much talking about how, blah, 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 I'm evil now, whatever. Instead, he just gets on the screen, says that there's an emergency at the central processing plant. The entire Galar region is in danger. Champion Leon would not postpone the Pokemon League for even one day to deal with this. And Leon gets understandably miffed at this. And then, rather than Leon goes up top to deal with Eternatus, you go down low to deal with Rose. Instead, everyone goes down low to deal with Rose, you, Leon, and Hop. Or Leon first, and then you and Hop follow. And rather than you fight Chairman Rose, have a moment with him, and then you guys go up to do the plot stuff with Leon. But instead having them all interlinked, right? What if we got a moment where Chairman Rose and Leon talk to each other a little bit less amicably than they did the night before? What if you have a moment where Hop gets involved and actually comments on the fact that, yo, why didn't you let us get involved with this? And then Leon shuts him down. Highlighting the fact that Leon is just as culpable in the fact that he wasn't letting anyone get involved as Rose was. Heck, or even, just not Does not making Rose a surprise villain at the end. And you can even still battle him, even if he's not a villain. Like literally what you could have done is you could have had Chairman Rose be so fed up with Leon that he wouldn't let Leon go deal with Eternatus and instead is going to go deal with it himself. And then Leon is like, no way, I'm going to deal with it. And then you have to fight Chairman Rose to keep him busy, to keep him from stopping Leon, even though everyone is in agreement about what to do. A scenario like that would be vastly more interesting than what we actually got, and it really disappoints me that we didn't get it. Apologies for going fanfiction there for a minute. I just think it's important to note that there are a ton of different ways they could have handled the ending than how they did when they just made Rose evil. And that's the kind of moment that really sweeps everything out from under the rug. If the game had been able to stick the landing a little bit better, tie everything up with like a concise thematic point at the end, I think the story of Sword and Shield would have been much better remembered. Because of the overall pacing, like that one change wouldn't have turned the game into like a 10 out of 10 story or anything. But like, it would have been a huge difference. And as it stands, the story of Sword and Shield is disappointing. But there's still a lot of good in it, and a lot to appreciate. I think that looking at previous games with Sword and Shield in mind, it really makes me appreciate how good Pokemon has gotten at building interweaved relationships with itself. Although it does disappoint me as well, because Sword and Shield definitely took a step back in terms of the environmental storytelling that Sun and Moon was simply astounding at. And it makes me wonder about what we'll get for Scarlet and Violet. Time to tie back into the fact that this series of discussion videos is all about being excited and hyped for Scarlet and Violet. So, keep the comment section spoiler free, of course, but leave down below what you think about Sword and Shield story. What do you think the Scarlet and Violet story? Are you excited for that? Do you think it's going to be well written? Do you think that hoping for it to be well written is a fool's errand and I'm setting myself up for disappointment? Probably that one. Or did you find me comparing Champion Leon to Chairman Netero from Hunter x Hunter absolutely blasphemous? I know at least one of my friends is probably going to have my head on a platter for saying that. But that is going to be it for me today. I know this one was a lot more involved than the other discussions I've had so far. Because rather than just spitballing about like Pokemon mechanics and whatnot, I had like a in-depth like essay-esque thing to talk about. I might turn my thoughts into Sword and Shield into a more formal video essay type thing later. I have multiples of those outlined and written out. I just have to do the YouTuber video essayist thing to make it. But I figured that for this discussion in particular, since there's so many loose ends in Sword and Shield, I figured it'd be appropriate to do the talk about Sword and Shield like this. But anyway, thank you all very much for coming. I hope you all have a good day. Be excited for Scarlet and Violet. And bye there, YouTube.